The crates rattled as she dragged them across the dirt, trying to steady her breath before anyone noticed how it kept slipping from her control. The morning air clung to her skin, thick with the restless quiet that settles before trouble makes itself known. She worked fast, each movement sharp with purpose, hoping the routine would swallow her whole. But the silence broke when she felt a shadow settle over her. She didn't look up. She didn't dare. Then the fabric of her sleeve brushed against a splintered board and slid back just enough to expose the ink she had fought so hard to bury. The world narrowed. The general's steps slowed, and she heard the faintest pause in his breath. It struck her like a warning bell. At that moment, she understood nothing would remain hidden anymore. Something long buried had surfaced, and the ground beneath her life quietly shifted as if preparing to crack open beneath her feet. What truth was buried beneath the ruins? Whispers crawled through the camp long before anyone dared speak to her directly. She kept her head down, hoping the routine of lifting, sorting, and walking familiar paths would drown the rising unease. But every step seemed to echo the moment the tattoo had been exposed. The day moved slowly, as though the sun itself hesitated to cross the sky. She felt eyes track her movements, curiosity sharpening into doubt. What had once been a quiet place now carried the edge of suspicion. Somewhere in the swirl of activity, she sensed the general's presence, keeping its distance, but never truly leaving. The truth she had hidden for years now hovered just behind her, a shadow stretching longer with each passing hour. News in a camp never stays still. By noon, her name had woven itself into half-told stories that shifted with every retelling. Some claimed she carried a message from enemy lands. Others insisted the tattoo meant she belonged to a banned group no one dared mention aloud. She felt the rumors pressing against her like a tightening ring, shrinking every space she once moved through freely. Even familiar paths felt altered, as though the ground waited for her to make a wrong step. The quiet routines she once relied on felt thinner, stretched by the weight of secrets she no longer controlled. Every whispered glance reminded her that the past she had buried was gathering shape behind her. When the general finally called for her, his voice carried not anger but a heavy certainty. She followed him into a quiet corner of the camp, where the noise faded into a distant hum. The stillness felt sharper than any accusation. His questions were few, but each one sliced close to the truth she had tried to bury beneath years of silence. She answered with caution, offering pieces, but never the whole story. His eyes stayed steady, searching for the gaps she refused to fill. Between them hung a fragile tension, shaped by unspoken knowledge neither was ready to confront. She sensed that whatever future waited for her, it would not resemble the life she had tried to build. She chose each word with care, revealing only the parts of her past that could no longer remain hidden. The rest stayed locked behind her ribs, where memory and fear had tangled too tightly to separate. The general listened in measured silence, absorbing the truth she offered, while sensing the truths she withheld. When she finished, the air between them felt heavier than before. She could see that he recognized the danger woven through her story, even if she refused to name it. As she stepped back into the camp, she felt the world tilt, as though the next path forward had already begun to shape itself around her secret. Long before the camp whispered her name, the order she once belonged to had been buried beneath history's silence. Their symbols were stripped from banners, their stories cut from books, their survivors scattered across lands that refused to remember them. Yet echoes of their discipline lived within her, sharp, controlled, unyielding. The past she carried was no simple memory. It was the weight of a world that had vanished in fire. As she worked among the soldiers, she felt the distance between who she pretended to be and who she had once trained to become. Each heartbeat pressed against the truth she had hidden for years, stirring old vows she had hoped would fade. But the sight of the tattoo now awakened the ghosts she had tried to outrun. The memory returned with startling clarity. The courtyard where she once trained, the crack of wooden staffs against stone, the disciplined rhythm of feet moving in unison. She remembered the exhaustion, the bruises, The relentless drills meant to shape a child into something sharper than fear. That life had demanded silence, strength, and unquestioned loyalty. She had once believed in it with all her heart, unaware of the storm that would one day turn their unity into ruin. Even now, years later, she could still feel the sting of the instructor's words echoing beneath her skin. The Order had taken her childhood, but it had given her skills the world had never stopped hunting. She recalled the day she was taken from her home, though the memory felt like a distant echo carried through fog. There had been no chance for goodbyes, only the pull of unfamiliar hands and the promise that her life would serve a greater purpose. The road away from her family had been lined with confusion and fear she tried to swallow. She remembered gripping a small cloth in her pocket, the last piece of the world she had known, and refusing to let the tears fall where anyone could see. That journey marked the first time she understood how little control she truly held over her future. It was the beginning of everything she would later hide. The fall of the Order came without warning. One moment they trained under banners that promised protection. The next, the sky filled with smoke as betrayal struck from within their closest allies. She remembered the frantic dash through narrow stone halls, the sound of collapsing roofs, the screams swallowed by fire. The world she had known for years crumbled in a single night. Those who survived scattered into the darkness, carrying nothing but the tattoo that marked them for death. She had fled with only instinct to guide her, running until the mountains swallowed the last trace of the life she once served. In the aftermath, she made a promise to herself. No one would ever see the tattoo again. She wandered through distant towns, hiding her identity beneath plain clothes and long sleeves. The years that followed taught her how to build a life out of silence and small tasks, staying far from anyone who might know the truth. She created distance from the person she had once been, trying to bury her past beneath quiet routines and safe shadows. But despite her resolve, the mark remained a reminder that she could never truly escape what had shaped her. Now, confronted by the general's recognition, she felt the weight of that vow tightening around her once more. By the next morning, the camp no longer felt like a place she could blend into. Conversations halted when she walked by, and the rhythm of the day shifted around her like a current, pushing her toward deeper suspicion. She sensed the change in small details. The way soldiers straightened when she passed, the way silence stretched just long enough to sting. Even the familiar clatter of tools felt different, carrying a tension that crept under her skin. She kept her movements steady, forcing her breath to stay even, though the unease hung like a weight on her shoulders. Every step reminded her that the secret she had guarded for years now shaped the way the world saw her, whether she wanted it or not. Despite the growing tension, she noticed the general's quiet attempts to shield her from scrutiny. He never spoke of the tattoo again, but his presence lingered at the edges of her days, redirecting conversations before they turned dangerous and sending soldiers on errands that shifted attention away from her. It was not kindness she felt from him, but something heavier, an understanding that her past carried risks neither of them could ignore. She could see the strain in his posture as he balanced duty with the secrets he now guarded. His vigilance offered her a sliver of space to breathe, even as suspicion continued to spread like smoke through the camp. But not everyone chose to look away. The rival commander watched her with a sharpness that unsettled even the most seasoned soldiers. His presence carried a cold calculation, as though every movement she made revealed a piece of a puzzle only he understood. Rumors seemed to drift straight into his hands, feeding his ambition and sharpening his suspicion. Each time their paths crossed, she felt the air tighten, knowing he was waiting for the moment her story would slip. The way he observed her made it clear he believed her secret held value, something he could twist into power if given the chance. His interest grew into open interference. Soldiers she had spoken to found themselves questioned, and those who had merely looked in her direction were pulled aside for quiet interrogations. The rival commander's words spread quickly, suggestions that she carried more than supplies, that she might be a threat waiting to unfold. She felt the pressure closing around her, every whisper another thread pulling tighter. Though she kept her head down, her pulse sharpened with the fear that any misstep would draw his hand directly onto her past. The camp she had once moved through unnoticed now felt like a maze designed to expose every truth she hoped to keep hidden. She soon understood she could not navigate the rising tension alone. The walls were closing in, and every attempt to remain unseen only made her more suspicious in their eyes. Trust, once something she avoided, became a necessity she could no longer deny. She weighed her options carefully, knowing the wrong choice could drag her back into a world she had barely escaped. The general's guarded support offered one path. The isolation forced on her by the rival commander offered another. The moment she realized she must choose whom to believe felt like standing at the edge of a path she had tried to avoid her entire life, knowing the next step would change everything. The warning arrived before sunrise, carried by riders whose faces were streaked with dust and urgency. Enemy forces had shifted direction, moving faster than expected, pushing straight toward the vulnerable edge of the camp. The air thickened with tension as soldiers scrambled into formation, their shouts blending with the thud of hurried footsteps. She felt the familiar tremor of an approaching storm, the kind she had once trained her whole life to face. Though she kept to the sidelines, her senses sharpened with every distant rumble of movement across the hills. The camp braced itself for a threat that grew closer by the hour, and she knew the fragile quiet that had held her secrets was about to shatter. As preparations intensified, she felt the old instincts rise within her, uninvited yet impossible to suppress. Movements she had buried long ago returned with startling clarity. How to track distant noise, how to measure the rhythm of approaching danger, how to read the unspoken fear in the eyes around her. She tried to hide it, but every step revealed more of the discipline she once carried with ease. Even the general noticed, his gaze lingering with a mixture of recognition and concern. Though she worked among crates and ropes like before, she could sense the shifting attention around her. The skills she had abandoned were pushing to the surface, refusing to remain hidden. When a group of officers struggled to decide how to fortify the northern ridge, she found herself drifting closer, drawn by a problem she instinctively understood. She listened quietly at first, absorbing each detail, until a simple correction rose unbidden to her lips. Her voice was soft, almost uncertain, yet the solution was clear and effective. The officers paused, some skeptical, others curious, but her reasoning held. The general caught the moment instantly, recognizing the depth of knowledge she tried so carefully to hide. For the first time in years, she stepped into the shadow of the strategist she once trained to be. Though she did so with the caution of someone who feared what it might reveal. The rival commander seized the moment like a hawk, spotting vulnerable prey. Her sudden insight fueled the doubts he had been cultivating, and he wasted no time turning them into open accusation. His voice rang sharp across the camp as he demanded answers. Why a simple worker understood tactics meant for trained officers. Why she moved with the precision of someone shaped by a forbidden past. Soldiers gathered in a tightening circle, their faces tense with anticipation. She felt the weight of every eye upon her, the past pressing forward as though ready to expose itself through her silence alone. The ground beneath her seemed to tilt, and she realized the confrontation she had feared was no longer avoidable. Before the moment could fracture completely, the general stepped forward, with a steadiness that silenced the murmurs. His defense was firm, measured, and delivered with the authority that held the camp together. He dismissed the accusations, insisting that skill alone did not mark guilt. Yet she sensed the cost of his choice in the tightening lines of his face. Standing before his rival, he risked his own position to shield her from the storm she had unwittingly stirred. The crowd slowly dispersed, though the unease lingered like smoke after a fire. As she watched him walk away, she understood that his support had shifted something in the balance of power, and that neither of them could turn back from it now. Night settled over the camp like a heavy curtain, muffling the earlier chaos into uneasy stillness. She could no longer deny the truth pressing against the walls she had built around it. The time for silence had run its course. As she sat alone beside the dim fire, she felt the memories rise. Clearer now, sharper, refusing to be pushed aside. The tattoo was more than a relic of a forgotten order. It carried meaning bound to the fall of her people and the danger stirring beyond the hills. When the general approached, she lifted her sleeve, not with fear, but with the weight of someone finally ready to stop running. She spoke quietly, letting the truth slip free into the night's cool air, knowing once spoken it could never be taken back. She explained what few alive still knew. The tattoo was not merely a symbol, but a code tied to the final teachings of her order. Before the fall, the elders had crafted a sequence hidden in ink, a pattern meant to guide surviving members towards something they guarded fiercely, something enemies would do anything to possess. She remembered the stories whispered before the firelight dimmed, warnings that the code held power capable of reshaping the fragile balance of the region. The realization dawned on the general as her words unfolded, and she saw the weight settle upon him. Her past was no longer just a personal burden. It was a thread tied to a danger greater than either of them had imagined. But secrets rarely remain in the hands of the willing. The rival commander struck with the precision of a man who had been waiting for the perfect moment. Under the cover of night, his guards moved swiftly, surrounding the camp's quieter edges, while he advanced toward her with unrestrained determination. She saw the glint of victory in his eyes, the belief that she held the key to power he craved. His accusations were no longer whispered. They were demands sharpened by ambition. The camp seemed to tilt as soldiers hesitated, unsure whom to follow. She felt the old instinct to run rise in her chest, but this time the threat was not just to her life. It was to everything her order died to protect. When the moment tightened to a breaking point, unexpected allies emerged from the shadows, soldiers who had watched her quietly, weighing rumor against truth. They moved between her and the rival commander without hesitation, forming a small shield of loyalty she had never expected to receive. The rival commander's frustration ignited, but he could not force his way through without tearing the camp apart. She seized the chance, slipping into the darker edges of the camp where the shifting tents and narrow paths offered cover. Each step carried her farther from his grasp, as the night stretched wide around her. Escape was not freedom, but it was survival. And survival meant she still had a chance to protect the secret he sought. While she slipped into the night, the general uncovered the rival commander's treachery. Reports, hidden messages, and intercepted orders revealed a trail of ambition he had concealed beneath false loyalty. The truth spread through the ranks as dawn approached, changing the camp's mood from uncertainty to simmering anger. The general moved with firm resolve, knowing the confrontation had shifted beyond personal conflict. The camp needed to know where its loyalties stood. He realized that protecting her was no longer just about shielding a single survivor. It was about preventing a threat that could fracture their forces at the worst possible moment. The path ahead was narrowing, and every choice carried heavier consequences. The camp shifted into battle readiness as the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Every tent, every crate, every hurried footstep carried the weight of what approached. Soldiers moved with a focused urgency, their faces set with determination and fear in equal measure. She watched from a distance, knowing the threat on the ridge was no longer just an enemy force. It was a storm drawn toward a truth she had tried to bury. The air felt thick with anticipation, charged with the unspoken understanding that the next hours would decide far more than the camp's survival. She felt the familiar pull of duty tightening around her, awakening a part of her she had hoped would stay silent. But silence no longer held any refuge. She no longer fought her instincts. As the tension around her grew, the discipline she once tried to forget moved through her as naturally as breathing. She walked with purpose, scanning the terrain, reading the patterns of movement in the distance. Soldiers who once doubted her now watched with quiet respect, sensing the difference in her stride and focus. The old training she had buried beneath years of silence rose like a tide, steady and relentless. Each moment revealed more of the warrior she once promised she'd never become again. Yet she felt no fear, only clarity. The kind that arrives when fate reaches a point where hesitation can no longer exist. When the plan faltered and confusion spread through the ranks, she acted without waiting for permission. She moved swiftly toward a cluster of soldiers, pinned by enemy pressure on the ridge's edge, guiding them with precise gestures ingrained from years of training. Her instructions were calm, decisive, and carried the weight of someone who understood the rhythm of battle. Together, they advanced through a narrow gap in the rocks, striking with speed that turned the tide before the enemy realized their advantage had slipped away. For the first time, she no longer felt like a shadow hiding in plain sight. She became what the moment demanded, a force sharp enough to shift the balance before it shattered. The rival commander's schemes unraveled in the chaos. His attempts to sway the troops with fear and suspicion collapsed as the truth of his ambition spread through the ranks. Soldiers turned from him, their loyalty shifting toward the general whose steadiness held them together. Cornered by his own deceit, he lashed out with accusations that fell flat against the rising resolve of the camp. The unraveling was slow but undeniable. Each order he gave met with doubt, each shout losing its force. For all his attempts to grasp power, the battle revealed the emptiness behind his authority. The truth had found its way into the open, and his influence dissolved like smoke caught in a storm. The final wave hit with brutal force. She and the general found themselves standing side by side near the heart of the ridge, facing a surge that threatened to break the entire line. The roar of battle rose around them, mingled with the clang of steel and the cries of those pushing against the storm. She felt her strength waver, but pushed forward, drawing on every fragment of training she once tried to abandon. The general fought with unwavering resolve, matching her determination, strike for strike. In that moment, past and present collided, her hidden identity and his quiet loyalty binding them in a fight neither could walk away from. As the enemy finally faltered, the ridge fell silent under a sky streaked with smoke. When the last echoes of battle faded, the ridge fell into a quiet that felt almost unreal. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons across the ground, carrying the scent of exhaustion and victory. She moved slowly through the scattered remnants of the fight, her steps steady despite the weight of everything that had happened. The world seemed softer now, muted by relief and the fragile calm that follows survival. She watched soldiers tending to the wounded, adjusting broken shields, and gathering what remained of their strength. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a long, steady breath. The chaos had ended, but she knew the peace that followed would demand its own kind of courage. Rumors about her began to shift as the sun climbed higher. No longer whispered warnings, they took on the shape of stories. How she had moved through enemy lines with precision, how she had turned the tide where others faltered. The camp's fear slowly transformed into a cautious admiration, woven with the awe of those who had seen something unexpected take form before. She felt the weight of every glance, but it no longer carried the sharp bite of suspicion. Instead, it held curiosity, respect, and the beginnings of something she had not felt in a long time: acceptance. With the ridge secured and the threat pushed back, she found herself at a crossroads she could no longer ignore. The path ahead lay open, no longer bound by fear or hiding. She knew she could slip away again, disappearing into the quiet corners of distant towns. Yet the thought no longer felt like freedom. Something had changed. The battles, the truth, the people who had stood at her side despite the danger she carried. For the first time since childhood, she felt the faint shape of a future she could choose, not one chosen for her. That choice lingered before her, like a horizon ready to be reached. Later, the general approached her with a quiet understanding etched in his expression. He spoke not as a commander, but as someone who had witnessed the truth behind the silence she carried. He did not ask for explanations, nor did he offer empty promises. Instead, he acknowledged the legacy of the order she came from, the bravery, the sacrifice, and the shadow it left behind. His words carried respect without intrusion, leaving space for her to decide what her past would mean from this moment forward. She felt a sense of calm settle over her, knowing that the truth had finally been met with something stronger than fear. As night settled once more over the camp, she traced her fingers lightly across the tattoo on her arm, no longer a mark of danger or shame. It felt like a bridge between the life she had survived and the life still waiting for her. She understood now that the legacy of her order did not end in the ruins she had escaped. It lived in the choices she made, in the courage she carried, and in the people who had stood beside her. Somewhere within the quiet of the evening, she sensed that the mark's meaning would continue. Not as a secret, but as a story reborn in the hearts of those who witnessed her journey. And for the first time, she felt ready to walk into whatever future waited beyond the firelight.